And hi, everyone. Welcome to eBizChat, where it's all about business. My name is Rick Zanotti, and I'm joined by Dr. Susan Nash. How are you, Susan?
I'm good today, and I'm so glad we have Dr. Ed Stuart again.
He's the Venerable. Guest. Now, he has a new name. He's now the Venerable Dr. Ed Stuart.
Oh, that's right.
That's right. We posted it that way, the Venerable Dr. Ed. He's a world-class economist. Yep, we've got it. We've got him covered. And in studio, we've got Harold Muliati. He's our video producer. And again, the Dr. Venerable Dr. Ed Stewart's with us. He's always a pleasure. Here we go. More and more people are working remotely every day. Your company may already be remote. You may be new to working remotely, whether you're a worker or a manager. Working remotely has some challenges and some very good points to it as well. In our training, we'll make sure that you learn how to work remotely, how to build trust, how to do all the things that make remote working successful. And we'll also talk about some of the pitfalls and what to avoid. Working remotely for workers and managers. It's our new course on Udemy. Thanks. This show is sponsored by Relate Corporation. Visit us at www.relatecasts.net. Thanks. And we are back in that center position of power. It's the Venerable one. How are you doing, Ed?
Great, Rick. Good to see you. Good to see Susan, and good to hear Harold.
Yep. Well, you're a welcome fixture on our show. Always love having you on. And you must be having a blast right now with all the economic news and what's going on, the market, the this, the that. When do you rest?
Yeah, you're right. Economists it's somewhat guilt-inducing because whenever there's economic turbulence or uncertainty or all of this exuberance followed by pessimism, and then you've got all of the GameStop, Reddit, Robinhood stuff going on, and Bitcoin, and as I told you, and to relate, not pun intended, but I'm teaching online, and there's all kinds of things to talk about. I need some help with how to do online education effectively because it is different than teaching in a classroom or face to face. But the good news is there's a lot to talk about, and it's pretty easy to interest students these days in economic issues because of all of what's going on. I think the only other field that has the same or maybe a slightly higher level of interest is immunology and virology and epidemiology. Obviously, those are even more important than economics, but those two things, I think, are the key subject matters of the day.
Yeah,
I totally agree. And it's so interesting because before the show we were talking about the economic results of like the fourth quarter, and what pops out to you, Ed, about what's going on?
Well, the GDP data, which came out today, actually what came out today was the second estimate. The Bureau of Economic Analysis, which is part of the Commerce Department, they're the people in charge of the gross domestic product data statistics, and it comes out quarterly. And the reason it comes out quarterly is that businesses and economic institutions almost always report their financial results on a quarterly basis. So like most income statements, and that's what GDP, as I tell my students, is the mother of all income statements. So the Bureau of Economic Analysis publishes the GDP data on a quarterly basis, but they do three estimates. They do a first estimate, kind of just impressionistic from the early data they get, and for the fourth quarter of 2020, which was over a month and 25 days ago, what came out today was the second estimate. They have more data. There it is on the screen. And there'll be one more final estimate that comes out in March. And what comes out in that picture shows, as I always tell my students, except they're not old enough to remember one of my favorite singers, I always say the great Scottish philosopher Rod Stewart, one of his best songs was "Every Picture Tells a Story." And the GDP picture says that although we came back somewhat significantly in the third quarter of 2020, the fourth quarter was much more slow, much more hesitant in terms of economic growth, and that's also reflected in the unemployment numbers. The official unemployment rate is just a little above 6%. It's come down from the height of last March when it was 10 and 11%, but it stopped coming down. And the gap in GDP. So that's one of the real questions right now is the stimulus package, right? The $1.9 trillion stimulus package that is the Biden administration, the American Rescue Package, that is getting some debate. I think they're putting it up for a vote in the House of Representatives at the end of tomorrow or the end of the week. And there's some argument, is it too little? Is it too much? It reminds me, Rick, of the Goldilocks story, right? Is the porridge too hot? Is the porridge too cold? And with the GDP data that came out, Susan, today, the gross domestic product at the current dollar, I mean, just at current prices, is $21.49 trillion. If you divide that into the proposed stimulus package of 1.9 trillion, you come up with about 9% of GDP. And my preferred unemployment rate is the U6 unemployment rate, which includes people who quit looking for a job. And it's at about 11%. So my judgment is that the stimulus package is just about right? That it's not too big, it's not too small. I mean, it is big. You know, Rick, you're too young, Susan, to remember this, but Rick might. The late great senator from the state of Illinois, Everett McKinley Dirksen, one of the great Republican senators, he said, a million here, a million there. Pretty soon you're talking about real money. But now with modern, it's a billion here, a billion there. Pretty soon you're talking about real money. So 1.9 trillion is a lot of money, but it's less than 10% of U.S. GDP. And so I think that's about right. And I think that's what the uncertainty of whether it's going to get passed. Is it going to be the whole 1.9 trillion? Is it going to be something less? That I think is one of the drivers of the volatility on the stock market.
When I think it's basically the same bill, because it never really went out before. Back in, I think, November, December, they've been arguing this bill now since, I think, November. And originally, I think they did send out one that was, I think, $600, right, in December.
Yeah, that was the one. It was put forward by the Trump, Mnuchin, Pelosi kind of agreement, and there was a bill that came out in November, and that generated the $600
right. But I remember
check.
that in that bill, it was a $1 trillion bill, of which I think it was 150 or 200 million went to actual relief, and the rest went to everywhere else, the other countries, boats, you name it. And you just go, what a waste of money. But here we go again. That's our typical Congress and Senate at work. And so I don't know what this one is. This is a 1.9 trillion. How much of that is actually going to the people and companies versus more pork? I haven't really analyzed it.
Half of it's going to people and companies. About a fourth of it is going for vaccine rollout, because the one of the many failures of the Trump administration is they had no vaccine rollout plan. So it's kind of being created on the fly day by day. And so, fortunately, companies like Amazon and Starbucks and FedEx and UPS are stepping up to deliver vaccines, but that costs money, right? And it costs a lot of money because we've got to vaccinate. Well, there are 330 million Americans, and the best epidemiologists say we need to vaccinate probably about 70%. So that's a little over 200 million folks.
It's not going to happen.
Yeah, it'll happen. The question is when, right? And hopefully it'll happen rapidly. But it might not happen till fall. But yeah, it'll happen.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't think you're going to get 70% of people to take it. I have my doubts.
I think that. Well, I think the polling is probably right at about 70% that will take it. And fortunately, right now, the nursing home fatalities have dropped dramatically, and that's because most of them, are a large part of the older people who are in nursing homes, have been vaccinated. Their acceptance is much more than 70% because I think they realize that this is their best hope of staying alive and staying out of the hospital. So I'm pretty optimistic that we'll get to 70%, but it'll be summer before that. I haven't gotten a shot yet. I'm 72, and I'm still waiting on either Walgreens or CVS or my doctor to have enough to distribute. The good news this week is that the Johnson & Johnson vaccine looks like it's set for approval and looks like it's going to be some very impressively effective, and that will add considerable
the Johnson & Johnson is actually more of a real vaccine, whereas the mRNA ones are very different. And I wouldn't take an mRNA one. I'd avoid that like the plague. Maybe the Johnson & Johnson one at least acts like a vaccine. The other ones aren't really vaccines. They're just labeled vaccines. It's a little bit funky what they're doing. So yeah,
I'm just the opposite. I'd take the BioNTech mRNA.
That's the Pfizer one. Yeah.
Yeah, it was created by the Germans, or actually two Turkish Germans who have real solid credentials in vaccine research. They were working originally on cancer vaccines, and when they saw the DNA sequence of the COVID-19, they knew that they could develop they could modify their cancer vaccines for this COVID. For a corona vaccine, and so they're the ones that developed it. Pfizer did the testing, and Pfizer is doing the manufacturing. But the Pfizer vaccine is actually a BioNTech, and it's a very impressive company.
Here's an economics question. Oh, sorry. So here's an economics question about all this. Okay, so let's assume that people are getting vaccinated, so they're getting, and at this pace, we might have like 50% maybe by summer. So, what are the economic impacts of people getting immunized, and which industries will see the impact first?
That's a great question, because I think there are two things buffeting the stock market, right? The negative buffets is what I think is somewhat irrational fear of inflation, but whatever, I think is not that important. That's putting downward pressure on stock prices. What's putting upward pressure and optimistic sentiments on stock prices is the vaccine rollout and the reopening of the economy. And one of the numbers I've been looking at, Susan, is what parts of the economy are really hard hit. So in the January numbers, the unemployment rate for those in the leisure and hospitality is 15.9%. And I think that's grossly underestimated. It's probably closer to 25 or 30%. So restaurant hospitality is really, really hurting. Transportation is also at almost 9%, and that's primarily passenger transportation, because the transportation of goods and products, people are still buying things, right? Mm-hmm. They're buying lots of home office equipment so that Rick can sell them online management and learning. So they're buying lots of computers, lots of software, lots of furniture, right? And one of the things that people are also buying, one of the contributors to GDP, is the sale of single-family homes. So that's one of the COVID drivers, is people who have 2 bedrooms need 3 bedrooms. People who have 3 bedrooms need 4 bedrooms. And it's also kind of driving the population, the older working population, professional population, out of large urban centers, because if you're going to work remotely, you don't need to be in an office downtown. You can be in a bigger house with nice furniture. But if you're going to be at home and your kids are going to be at home, then you need more room. So that generates a demand for washers and dryers and refrigerators and furniture and all of the things that go into a house. So
you were talking about transportation, and I was reading an article about Seattle Airport, SeaTac, and they used to travel 50,000 passengers per day. Now they're doing 2,000.
Yeah,
that's a large drop. That's enormous.
That's a large drop.
And that's only that airport. I haven't checked LAX yet, but I'm sure that's about the same. Probably much worse. LAX, I think, has probably quadrupled that number per day. Right. And I don't know what they're flying right now in terms of people.
And that's a good point, Rick, because it's not just people who aren't flying, it's people who aren't renting cars, people who aren't going to restaurants, people who aren't going to hotels, people who aren't going to conventions, right? So the work at home phenomenon that RelateCast is doing is not just about work at home, it's about convention at home, professional meetings at home, education at home, interviewing at home. I mean, one of the reasons that economists or all professionals go to conventions is there's always a job market attached to it. And that now has to take place virtually as well. So all of those kind of associated industries with airline travel, especially professional airline travel, are really hard hit. So the increase in transportation unemployment feeds the leisure and hospitality unemployment and entertainment, right?
Yeah, and I just wanted to jump in because before we went on for the topic of SeaTac. So keep in mind that SeaTac is a major gateway to international destinations in Asia Pacific, and so I can tell you that just from the conferences and trade shows that I'm involved in, there's literally zero traffic and travel for professional meetings. And first of all, I mean, people who are traveling, it's usually for personal reasons because they have to do the 2-week quarantine. In China, it's like 4 weeks now. And so I think that, like what you're talking about, probably domestic travel to places you could drive to or short hops will open up first with the vaccine, domestic.
Right.
But the international is still a long way away, I think.
Yeah, right, right. And this is a worldwide pandemic. That's why it's a pandemic. And there are lots of other places that are still locked down or will be locked down, and will be locked down to foreigners, not necessarily to their own domestic residents, but to foreigners. So you're right, Susan, that international travel is really the one of the parts that's really hurt. About the only transportation that's going on now, professional transportation, is plumbers flying to Texas, right? So if you're a plumber, there's a job for you in Texas, right? There are lots of jobs for you in Texas, right? I would say the money is flowing to plumbers, but that would be kind of a weak joke. But anyway.
Well, but that's another point, that a lot of the jobs that we're seeing in construction, there's a big shortage, especially things like electricians and like skilled journeyman type of construction management teams.
Well, that's been a shortage we've had for years too, way before this. Or we weren't putting out any tradespeople.
That's true. Well, they were coming in from other countries.
Right. But we closed. Most of the trade schools are gone. They don't teach it in high school anymore. It's just a shame. But so one other thing that we've kind of killed ourselves on, that we don't get good tradespeople anymore. At least not a lot of young ones getting into it.
And that may come back, Rick, because one of the things that's happening because of the pandemic is supply chain shortening and supply chain redundancy. We've talked about this before on this cast, that with that coming back, you're going to need more manufacturing people, more construction people, because you can't as easily send your production to China or South America or East Asia or wherever you might have sent it before, which is a good thing. There are going to be those kinds of jobs. The bad thing is that it's going to make the stuff we used to import more expensive. But in economics, there's everything is a trade-off, right? So,
well, and speaking of supply chains, President Biden signed an executive order yesterday, I think, or the day before, about the 4 different supply chain. Yes, would you like to talk about that a bit?
That's what kind of put that in my brain, because that's obviously one of the things that really needs to be looked at on a national level, on a comprehensive level, and the federal government's the only place that can do that. And the other thing that the Texas disaster has brought up is that we need a lot more construction of power systems, water systems, energy systems, redundant and otherwise, not just in Texas, but other places as well, because this kind of cold coming down from the Arctic to the southern parts of the United States, that's all part of climate change, right? That's kind of strangely enough, or kind of counterintuitive, but the warmer that the Arctic gets, the colder Texas is going to get. And that's not going to change. It's going to just get worse. And to some extent, Chicago is getting warmer. We've had a couple of weeks of snow, but up until the 1st of February, actually the week of Valentine's, we've had a very mild winter, and it's back mild again. It's almost up to the high 40s and 50s. I'll go running tomorrow outside, and I'll be covered from head to toe, but I guarantee you there'll be 20-year-old boys out there running in shorts and t-shirts just to be macho. But so places like Texas and New Mexico and Alabama and Louisiana are going to have to start getting ready for cold snaps that are going to happen again and again.
Well, I think that one thing too, that like, for example, in Oklahoma, we have all of the above approach to energy, and so there's and so there's a mixture. In Texas, they did too, but they didn't know how many would be offline because of lack of organization. But but it revealed that they had actually taken offline quite a few coal firing plants, and also the nuclear plants are like over 40 years old. So some countries have all of the above approach to energy, but let's do it cleanly and safely. Others don't. They pick and choose, and then the ones in energy poverty are just thrilled when they have anything. So it's interesting.
Let's hope we can get rid of coal permanently, because that's just terrible. And one of the things I learned being a resident of Norman, Oklahoma, and a refugee from Houston is that Oklahoma, at least back when I was there in the 70s, Oklahoma got a lot colder than Texas. So the good news for Oklahoma is that they were a little bit, they're prepared for really tough winter. And Oklahoma is one of the leading states for wind power. And people always say, "Oh, Chicago, it's so windy." I said, "No, it's not windy compared to Oklahoma. The windiest I've ever been in my entire life was living in Oklahoma. Every picture that I have from Oklahoma, back when I had hair, is I'm leaning over and my hair is blowing in one direction, or my mother or my grandmother, and we could never take good pictures because their hair was always getting poofed out by the wind that was sweeping down the plains, as the song goes." Right?
Well, there are a lot of debates about how to best make all energy cleaner and greener, and with carbon capture and sequestration, it's even possible to make coal better with the kinds of technologies they have.
We're going to disagree there, all right? Yeah, okay. Because I think it's impossible to make coal better in any possible.
Clean coal technology now, but it's not everywhere.
And I think that's kind of a branding statement. Yeah. I don't think it's technically true. I think there's still methane and sulfur and every other kinds of things that go into the air when you burn coal, not just carbon. The British found that out in 1956. You weren't alive, Susan, in 1956.
Yeah,
but London had a and actually there's a very good episode in The Crown about what happened in 1956 and the government and the prime minister and what they had to do to save people in London from really dying. So that's one of those things that I always tell my students: where there's problems and money, there are jobs. So there are going to be huge jobs in environmental economics for the next 30, 40, 50 years. And
well,
how to make energy demand less and how to make energy supply more, and do it without killing the polar bears in the Arctic.
Well, to support your point about coal, I will say that you can see that was the reason for the horrible smog and air pollution in Beijing and China. So it was primarily coal.
Exactly. Yeah. I've told Rick, I might have told you the horror stories of the last time I was leaving Beijing and I was sitting in the airport and my plane was on the other side of the glass, 20 or 30 feet away. At least I assume it was there because I couldn't see it, right? Because it was there was so much particulate in the air. So, yeah, that's a big issue in China. It was a big issue in Eastern Europe. They've moved away from it a little bit, but in the good old days of communism, and I always have to tell my students, when I say the good old days of communism, I'm being sarcastic, right? So don't run home and say. But in the good old days of communism, in the northwest corner of what was then Czechoslovakia, you had grade school age kids with pulmonary disease and lung diseases because of all of the coal that was being burned, not only in Czechoslovakia, but across the border in East Germany. And as I think I've said before, I grew up in Houston in the 60s, 50s, and 60s, and it was the era of oil refineries and paper mills, and one of the slogans of Houstonians is "We don't trust air we can't see," right? And it was pretty bad.
Well, I remember L.A. when we moved here in 1967. Yeah. You knew you landed in L.A. because it stunk. It just reeked in L.A. And then they got rid of incinerators. Right. That was a big one.
Right.
All of a sudden, without incinerators, it was a lot better. And then they started doing cleaner technology and not allowing so much burning. And within 10 years, LA smelled great. You didn't really smell it that much anymore. But I remember in the beginning, it really smelled like garbage everywhere.
Oh, wow.
It was
I had no
bad.
idea. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I do remember, like we would drive from Norman to Ardmore to visit my grandmother, and we would go through Wynnewood. We always called it Stinky Wood because there was like a refinery
Through the mighty Arbuckle Mountains,
right?
So what do you think about the stock market right now?
Yeah, I was going to ask the same.
I was thinking about that, Rick, when I was thinking about today, and the stock market went way up yesterday and it went way down today.
Yeah.
And it reminded me when people ask me, it occasionally happens, students ask me this, and the manager of the garage where I park my car asked me about 6 months ago, he was interested in the stock market. Can I read something? And I always recommend Burton Malkiel's A Random Walk Down Wall Street. And I checked it. The 12th edition was just published last year. Burton Malkiel is a professor of economics and finance at Princeton, and it's a paperback, and you can get it in the library, right? And he always talks about the rational way to be a stock market investor is dollar cost averaging. You buy a certain amount of stock every month, and these days you buy some kind of an index mutual fund. You buy a certain amount every month, and it's actually better for you in the long run if the stock market is going up and down, because you want to buy on the down as much as you want to, well, more than you want to buy on the up. And what tends to happen is that when the stock market is going up like it was yesterday, relatively unsophisticated people jump in and buy, and then when it's going down like it did today, they sell, which is exactly the opposite of what you want to do. You want to buy when it's going down and sell when it's going up. And actually what you want to do, Rick, is you don't want to do much of either. You want to buy a little bit, especially if you're a young man like you are. We talked how much younger you are than me. But if you're a relatively young person, or you're just a teenage girl like Susan, you want to buy little bits every month, and you really hope that the stock market's going up and down, because some of those months you're going to be buying when the stock market is down. And the good thing is you get more shares per dollar if you're buying when the stock market is going down. Now, I think the last time I was on, I was quoting the old Merrill Lynch, "We're bullish on America." But one of the things that's at least supposedly spooking investors is that interest rates are going up a little bit. The 30-year Treasury is now up over 2%. Now, if you're as old as I am, you remember back in the good 1970s when interest rates were up over 17 and 18%.
Yeah.
So to say the phrase interest rates are up over 2%, people saying, "What? Is that up?" Right?
Yeah.
But I think that it goes back to the really good question that Susan asked. And I think the basic reason that interest rates are going up is not because of inflation fears, but expectations that the vaccine rollout and the vaccine efficacy will, by the third quarter, the fourth quarter, or certainly by 2022, will spark a fairly healthy rebound in the economy, and earnings of most publicly traded corporations will actually go up. So I guess my advice, Rick, would be, unless you need money right now and you've got a lot of money in the stock market, yeah, you might want to take some out. But if you're a long run investor and you want some place to put your money that in 10 or 15 years will grow, then it's still the U.S. stock market, although there have been a couple of reputable analysts that say, and even Malkiel says this in his recent editions, you need to have a little bit of international exposure, and the best place to go now is Europe, because their economies have really been beaten down. They've done a lot more locking down, so their GDP drops have been much more severe. Their income drops haven't, because they support their populations with much more unemployment and social benefits. But the rebound in European companies will be bigger, just because they've been down so much. So if I was a professional investment advisor, which I'm not, but I'd have 75 to 80% of my investments in U.S. stocks, the S&P 500 index, and then 10 or 15% in some kind of a European index that buys companies like Louis Vuitton and L'Oreal. And there was something in the Financial Times a couple of weeks ago that the French cosmetics companies are expecting big rebounds, because when people start going out, they need perfume, they need makeup, they need hair care, and so forth, much more so than they need when they're sitting at home.
That's a good point.
So that's one of the reasons why. And Louis Vuitton is one of my favorite stocks, LVMH. The LV is Louis Vuitton, but the M and the H are Moet and Hennessy. And when the restaurant sector begins to rebound, then Moet, Hennessy, Pernod Ricard, Diageo, the big European alcohol companies will do much better.
Yeah.
For those cruises, buy some cruise stock.
Well, with that thought,
maybe I wouldn't be buying cruise stocks yet. I'd buy more alcohol and makeup, right?
Okay.
Just the stock. I don't makeup is not going to help me, as you can tell. All right. Yeah.
Well, with that thought, we are out of time, and as always, a pleasure having you on. We'll bring you on again. We barely touched the market and some other things today. There's a lot of naysayers about, the market's going to crash. It's going to crash. It's everywhere is going to crash. So I don't know. It could, I guess, but so far it seems to still be buoyed up. So far so good. And I thought I also read that the cryptocurrencies are starting to go down again.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
that's one thing. And unless you're a 19-year-old boy that's got a 50-year time horizon, I would stay out of any kind of cryptocurrencies. And unless you're you're a millionaire, a multimillionaire like Harold, who's got millions to lose, then I would stay out of cryptocurrencies as well.
Yep. Well, with that, we thank you for coming on again. And for you folks watching, please subscribe. Let us know what you think. And give us a thumbs up for whatever that counts. You can give us a thumbs down too, but we like the thumbs up better. Have a good one, everyone. We will see you next week on eBizChat. Thanks. Thanks again.
Bye, Rick. Bye, Susan.
Bye. Thank you.